Imagine a 50-year-old,
Hmm.
just a deeply entrenched political machine.
Right.
We're talking generations of dominance, massive institutional backing, and basically an absolute monopoly on power. And then over a single weekend, it just gets completely wiped out by an actor starting a brand new party. Or,
Hmm.
picture this massive multi-billion-dollar U.S. naval operation designed to secure one of the most critical oceans on the planet, and is completely paralyzed by, well, by a handful of cheap disposable drones.
Right. It just completely upends our entire understanding of how power works. I mean, we have this assumption that sheer scale, right, whether it's legacy political infrastructure or, advanced military hardware, that scale basically guarantees stability. But what we're seeing right now is that the old tools of leverage are just, they're failing against asymmetrical, fast-moving disruptions.
Yeah, failing hard. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a really intense stack of source material today for you. We're acting as your current affairs mentors, basically covering everything from the massive 2026 election results and the mechanics of local justice to global warfare, some serious economic turbulence, and, of course, artificial intelligence.
That's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. It is. And just a quick heads up for you before we get into the weeds here. A lot of this material centers on highly charged political events from the recent elections. We're going to dig into the mechanics of what happened and why. But to be completely clear, we're just impartially reporting on the analysis contained in the sources. We aren't taking sides, and we definitely aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoints today.
Exactly. And the overarching theme connecting all these seemingly disparate events is really this friction between disruption and resilience. We are watching legacy systems basically fracture under the weight of new demographics, shifting global alliances, and just incredibly rapid technological advances.
Yeah, fracture is definitely the right word. Let's start with the most immediate fracture point right here at home, which is the domestic political map. The 2026 electoral results don't just represent a shift. They feel like, well, an absolute earthquake.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, look at West Bengal. Mamata Banerjee's 15-year rule comes to an end as the BJP secures this historic win. But the detail that really highlights the scale of this disruption for me is that she lost her own Pabanapur seat to Suvendu Adhikari by, over 15,000 votes. I mean, losing your home turf sends a massive signal.
It does. And the reaction to that loss really illustrates how contested the actual, the mechanics of voting have become.
Right.
Because the Trinamool Congress didn't just concede the ideological battle, they pointed directly to the Special Intensive Revision, or the SER process, regarding the electoral rolls.
Right, yeah. The sources note that over 27.1 lakh voters were deleted in Bengal during that review process.
Yeah.
So naturally, the TMC is claiming this was, a surgical strike on their specific voter base to just loot the election.
But when you dig into the constituency-level data provided in the reports, the narrative gets incredibly messy.
Really messy.
Yeah, because out of the 20 specific seats that had the absolute highest number of voter deletions, the TMC actually still managed to win 13 of them.
Which is wild. So it tells us that while the roll revisions were obviously substantial and super controversial, they aren't this, silver bullet that fully explains a massive statewide defeat. To understand the root cause of that kind of sweep, you really have to look deeper into the demographic currents.
Definitely. And there's honestly no better place to analyze those currents right now than Tamil Nadu.
Oh man, the Tamil Nadu outcome is staggering to read about. Actor Vijay launches the TVK, which is a brand new political entity, and just walks away with 107 seats. I mean, the DMK and AIADMK have traded power back and forth for half a century. Sitting Chief Minister N.K. Stalin lost his Kalathur seat by nearly 9,000 votes. How does a legacy machine fail that spectacularly, seemingly overnight?
Well, by fundamentally misunderstanding the baseline expectations of the modern voter. For decades, the political model in states like Tamil Nadu and even West Bengal to a degree was heavily anchored in welfare distribution.
Right.
Direct cash transfers, subsidized goods, free transportation. That was the primary mechanism for securing loyalty. But the electorate has evolved. And this change is largely being driven by Gen Z, young professionals, and women.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I have to push back on the premise that this is some grand philosophical evolution.
Right.
I mean, a lot of political commentary just labels this as standard anti-incumbency. Governments get tired, voters get frustrated with local corruption, the pendulum swings. Why are the analysts in our sources insisting this is a structural shift?
Yeah.
It feels like we're just talking about a tech startup making a 50-year-old legacy monopoly obsolete.
That's a great analogy, actually. And what's fascinating here is that it's not just a rejection of an incumbent. It's a rejection of the incumbent's entire theory of governance. Think about the psychology of a young voter today. Welfare is no longer seen as this benevolent gift from a leader.
Interesting.
It's viewed as the absolute baseline of governance. They assume whoever comes into power is going to keep the direct benefit transfers flowing. Welfare has basically become the floor.
So if the floor is guaranteed no matter who is in office, what are they actually voting for?
They're voting for the ceiling,
Mhm.
and the ceiling is aspiration. It's job creation, private sector growth, a vibrant economy where a university degree actually translates into upward mobility. The legacy parties kept campaigning on the strength of their welfare delivery, essentially promising a really solid floor. The disruptors bypassed that entirely and just campaigned on the ceiling.
Wow. And that dynamic explains the sheer map-wide sweep we're seeing in the data. Like in Kerala, the Congress-led UDF wins 102 seats, completely dismantling the CPIM government. Which means India doesn't have a left government in power anywhere right now.
For the first time in decades, yeah.
And meanwhile, in Assam, the BJP, under Himanta Biswa Sarma, holds on to power with another 102-seat landslide. Regional parties are just losing their grip entirely to national narratives or massive new disruptors. I think the sources said the BJP is sitting with 17 chief ministers now, and the NDA has 22.
It just shows how quickly power can be consolidated when you capture the aspirational zeitgeist of the electorate. But, there's a massive disconnect between how democracy functions at this macro-electoral level and how the state actually interacts with citizens on a daily basis at the micro level.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to a really deeply troubling section of the reading regarding the judiciary. We just talked about an electorate voting for this high-tech aspirational future. Yet, when you look at how local trial courts operate in certain areas, it feels like stepping into a medieval fiefdom. The Supreme Court recently had to intervene to strike down bail conditions set by local courts in Odisha.
And the specifics of those conditions are what make this case so alarming. It requires a really close look at who is actually being targeted.
Right. We're talking about accused individuals, predominantly from Dalit and Adivasi communities, who were involved in anti-mining protests. The local trial courts ordered them, as a mandatory condition for receiving bail, to physically clean the Kashipur police station every single morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. for 2 months.
Just think about the power dynamic there. To secure your constitutional right to bail, you are forced to provide unpaid manual labor to the very police force that arrested you for protesting.
Wait, really? Cleaning the station? That's insane. Chief Justice Surya Kant called the orders unconstitutional and obnoxious, declaring them completely null and void. He explicitly pointed out that they reflect a deep caste bias and operate on an illegal presumption of guilt. But here's the thing I just can't wrap my head around. If the Supreme Court has to step in to stop a modern-day judge from handing out what sounds like a feudal punishment, what does that say about the realities of our trial courts? What is happening in the thousands of lower courtrooms across the country every single day?
It reveals the localized realities of structural inequality. The legal analysis in the sources makes a crucial observation here. You do not see these types of creative, highly punitive bail conditions imposed on privileged members of society.
Right, a corporate executive accused of financial fraud isn't being ordered to sweep the local precinct.
Exactly. It was a mechanism applied specifically to marginalized communities who were protesting corporate mining operations. The trial court, rather than acting as a neutral arbiter of the law, essentially weaponized the bail process to reinforce a very specific oppressive social hierarchy. The Supreme Court's intervention is critical, but it really highlights the immense friction between the constitutional ideals at the top and the lived reality of justice at the bottom.
It takes so much effort just to enforce basic legal dignity domestically, but when you look at the international arena right now, it's basically a masterclass in what happens when the rulebook completely disintegrates. We are seeing a total restructuring of how warfare is waged.
The international landscape is currently defined by asymmetrical threats. State actors are realizing they don't need a massive military to exert massive economic pressure. Just look at the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, this is one of the most critical choke points for global trade. The UAE is actively accusing Iran of targeting an empty oil tanker owned by ADNOC, which is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, using drones. So the United States tries to intervene. They launch this major naval mission called Project Freedom to secure the strait, and it basically fails. It seems to have backfired entirely, resulting in more Iranian attacks and literal fires at UAE ports.
Because a traditional naval fleet is designed to fight another traditional naval fleet. But the Strait of Hormuz is being destabilized by swarms of relatively cheap drones. $1 billion destroyer is highly inefficient against a $1,000 piece of flying plastic.
That's terrifying.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cost-to-damage ratio heavily favors the disruptor, rendering conventional military dominance surprisingly fragile.
Which changes the entire calculus of defense strategy. The defense minister here in India actually touched on this recently when discussing Operation Sindoor. He highlighted indigenous military tech systems like Akashtir and BrahMos. But his core message wasn't about building bigger tanks. He explicitly warned that modern conflict has pivoted away from conventional battlefields. It is about drones, sensors, and the weaponization of everyday technology, like pagers.
It completely erases the concept of a defined front line. A war zone is wherever a connected device happens to be.
And that lack of boundaries is leading to some truly horrific human exploitation. Our sources dive into the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, specifically how it's impacting the global south. We're seeing people from Kenya and other parts of Africa being lured to the front lines.
Yeah, they're brought in under the guise of legitimate employment opportunities. The digital recruitment networks are incredibly deceptive.
There's this devastating detail in the reporting, a Kenyan mother crying, "Why has Russia taken my son?" The analysts in the source material liken these digital recruitment schemes to modern slave ships arriving in Mombasa. It's chilling. You have desperate young people looking for that economic ceiling we talked about earlier, applying for what they think is a security or logistics job abroad, only to find themselves thrown into a trench in Eastern Europe.
It is a stark reminder that regional instability never stays regional. The global system is just too interconnected. A drone strike in the Middle East or a deceptive job ad in East Africa cascades through the global economy almost instantaneously.
Which brings us right to our own economy. Let's trace the domino effect from that blocked choke point in the Strait of Hormuz straight into the Indian taxpayer's wallet.
The vulnerability we are facing is primarily structural. India relies on the Strait of Hormuz for roughly 60% of its liquefied natural gas imports.
So when drones start shutting down that waterway, the panic is pretty immediate. Petronet LNG is reacting by trying to aggressively expand its strategic reserves. They're planning to increase their cryogenic storage capacity by 70%. But here's the catch. You can't just flip a switch and have more storage. Building these highly specialized cryogenic tanks takes about 3 years.
Leaving a massive 3-year window of vulnerability. And the global financial markets are ruthlessly efficient at pricing in that kind of systemic risk.
The currency markets certainly are. I mean, the rupee has taken a historic beating, hitting an all-time low of 95.33 against the dollar. The Reserve Bank of India is in full crisis mode trying to defend the currency. They're looking at pulling out the 2013 playbook reviving schemes, specifically designed to draw in dollar deposits from non-resident Indians. They're even considering scrapping the withholding tax on overseas government bonds just to incentivize foreign capital to flow back into the country.
The central bank is trying to build a financial fortress because the domestic revenue indicators are simultaneously flashing red. They're fighting a war on two fronts here.
Yeah, direct tax collections have slowed down significantly. We're looking at a 5-year low growth rate of just 5.12%, reaching around 23.4 lakh crore rupees. That misses the internal projections. And this domestic squeeze is triggering a massive fight between the central government and the states. The chief economic advisor recently sounded the alarm on what he called subnational fiscal indiscipline.
Let's break down the mechanics of that because it really gets to the heart of how India's federal structure manages financial risk.
So what does this all mean? The specific example the CEA used was West Bengal. The state spends around 10% of its entire revenue on unconditional cash transfers. Now, I understand the political utility of that in winning elections, but let's look at the math. If a state government commits 1/10 of its budget to political freebies, their fiscal buffer is basically zero. So when an external shock happens, say the price of LNG skyrockets because of a drone in Hormuz, that state immediately turns to the center for a bailout. I have to question the fairness of the federal structure here. Why should the central government, and ultimately the taxpayer, bear the risk when a global oil crisis hits if a state is recklessly spending 10% of its budget on freebies?
This is the exact debate the CEA is forcing into the open. His core argument is that in a globally integrated economy, a state's domestic accounting isn't an isolated matter anymore. Global investors and ratings agencies don't just look at New Delhi's ledger, they look at the combined deficit of the center and all the individual states. Fiscal indiscipline at the subnational level is no longer a closed domestic accounting matter. It is visible, and it is priced by global investors.
So a massive cash handout program in one state actively weakens the entire country's macroeconomic profile.
Precisely. It makes it tangibly more expensive for the RBI to defend the rupee against a dollar shock. The populism at the state level directly undermines the resilience at the national level. The financial plumbing is entirely connected.
Okay, so we're watching human regulators struggle to manage human politicians making human economic errors. But the final section of our sources introduces a completely different variable. We're moving beyond human management entirely and looking at artificial intelligence.
We have officially transitioned from AI as a theoretical tech novelty to AI as a systemic structural disruptor.
The financial markets are the front line. The market regulator, SEBI, is currently drafting an advisory focused on a highly advanced AI model by Anthropic known as Mythos. SEBI's warning is blunt. These algorithms are now operating at a speed that renders human oversight functionally obsolete.
Financial markets have relied on algorithmic, high-frequency trading for a long time. But what SEBI is flagging is a new capability entirely. These models aren't just executing pre-programmed trades faster, they are autonomously identifying and exploiting microscopic vulnerabilities in the market architecture in milliseconds.
Which completely breaks the regulatory model.
Right. If an AI detects a software loophole and executes millions of trades before a human regulator even has time to blink, the rules don't really matter anymore. The machine is dictating the reality of the market. It's a profound loss of control over our own economic infrastructure. But the disruption isn't just happening in high finance, it's happening in culture and entertainment as well.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The situation in China is a perfect example of this. There is a massive industry there for microdramas, these short, highly addictive soap operas made specifically for mobile screens. The sources detail how AI is entirely upending this space. Production companies are generating these shows for around $30 a minute. No cameras, no set crews, no human actors. It is entirely digital avatars and AI-generated scripts.
Think about what that represents culturally. The creative arts have historically been viewed as the ultimate refuge of human distinctiveness. We always assumed machines would automate the factory jobs and the spreadsheet jobs, not the storytelling jobs.
It brings up a deeply uncomfortable, almost existential question. If an AI can instantly identify and exploit a backdoor in our financial markets and simultaneously generate the shows we binge watch on our phones, what exactly is the fundamental value of human input left?
This raises an important question, and the source material actually tackles it head-on. One industry analyst argued that our fundamental value as humans is in our ability to imagine.
What do you mean?
AI is fundamentally an optimization engine. It identifies patterns in massive troves of existing data to exploit a financial loophole or generate a predictable soap opera plot. It mimics, it synthesizes, and it extrapolates. But the ability to conceptualize a genuinely unprecedented future, to imagine entirely outside the bounds of the training data, is still uniquely human. Surviving this technological transition, however, is going to test human resilience in unprecedented ways.
It really feels like every system we rely on is being stress tested at the exact same time. We've seen Gen Z voters effectively dismantle 50-year-old political dynasties by demanding economic aspiration over baseline welfare. We've watched the Supreme Court actively fight to erase medieval caste biases from local trial courts. We've tracked how a cheap drone in the Middle East can squeeze India's LNG reserves and tank the rupee. And we've seen how algorithms are rewriting the rules of both the stock market and the entertainment industry. It is a lot to process, but understanding these underlying mechanics is how you stay ahead of the curve. Thank you for joining us as we unpack this massive stack of sources today.
Before you go, I want you to consider the trajectory of what we've discussed today. We are already seeing AI bypass human actors in entertainment and operate faster than human regulators in finance. If the technology is already at this level today, how long will it be before AI is used to optimize our political campaigns and draft our economic policies? In a world of digital disruption, will our future leaders be human at all?